Is ESPN sleeping on the Jacksonville Jaguars? Bill Barnwell recently released his skill group rankings for the 2026 NFL season, and the Jaguars weren't even in the top half. We'll discuss where the Jaguars are ranked, plus my overall general thoughts on Bill Barnwell's comments. But guys, this episode of Jags Now is presented by our wonderful friends at PrizePicks. Make sure you use code HMA to get $50 in lineups whenever you play your first $5 lineup. And I also have a quick little challenge for you guys before we get into today's episode. I went back and looked at all the episodes last week, and the most liked video that we had was 81 likes. And truthfully, I appreciate all 81 of those likes. But I think we can top it on today's episode. Can we shoot for 100? Can we shoot for triple digits? I think we can do it. Without any further ado, let's get into today's episode. So Barnwell, as I previously mentioned, did rank all the skill groups for 32 NFL teams for 2026. We're going to go over here in just a moment his 4 criteria that he had in creating these rankings, and specifically where he ranked the Jacksonville Jaguars. So let's get into Barnwell's rankings criteria. So as previously mentioned, he only focused in on 2026, so not any future years or anything like that. He also factored in injury history, which Travis Hunter suffered an injury last season. Wide receivers weighted more than running backs and tight ends. Also, just a quick note, tight ends weren't even mentioned when discussing the Jacksonville Jaguars, so no Britton Strange or anything like that. And his focus was mainly on elite players and top 5 contributors. So just want to get that out of the way and give Barnwell at least the credit that this was his thought process going into these rankings. Now, without any further ado, let's break down Barnwell's rankings, going from 1 to 8. And I think, for the most part, I don't have a major problem with this kind of first page here. You got the Detroit Lions, the Los Angeles Rams, Cincinnati Bengals, Atlanta Falcons, San Francisco 49ers, Arizona Cardinals, Dallas Cowboys, Minnesota Vikings. I don't have really too many issues with that first bit, but, that is the top 8 for Barnwell. And then you got, the Philadelphia Eagles, the New England Patriots, the Seattle Seahawks, New York Jets, New Orleans Saints, Indianapolis Colts, Chicago Bears, and Baltimore Ravens. And you might be sitting there saying, okay, where are the Jacksonville Jaguars? Well, they come on this next page. Number 17 is the Green Bay Packers, followed by your Jaguars at number 18 overall. We're going to be talking about that here on today's show, but just to round out the entire list, followed it up with the Chargers, the Chiefs, the Steelers, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Denver Broncos, and the Houston Texans to rank out the top 24. And then the bottom dwellers include the Tennessee Titans, the Las Vegas Raiders, Washington Commanders, Carolina Panthers, Buffalo Bills, the Cleveland Browns, the New York Giants, and at the very bottom, the Miami Dolphins. So the question naturally that every Jaguars fan may wonder or just ask themselves briefly is, was this ranking too high or was this too low, right? Because the 18th ranking, on its initial surface, it feels kind of disrespectful and, feels kind of like Barnwell's sleeping a little bit. Well, let's just kind of discuss what Barnwell had to say about each part of the Jaguars kind of skill group and then kind of give my thoughts in terms of how Barnwell kind of sees things and my take on it. So without any further ado, let's get to what the ESPN man had to say. If the Jags get the best version of their existing receivers, they'll be in great shape. Brian Thomas Jr. looked like a superstar in 2024. Jakobi Meyers got white hot at midseason after being acquired from the Raiders. Parker Washington took over down the stretch and averaged just under 115 receiving yards per game over his final 4 contests. And Travis Hunter seemed to be hitting his stride as a wideout with a 101-yard game against the Rams before suffering his season-ending knee injury. If the Jaguars get those versions of those 4 wideouts in 2026, they'll be stacked. And we'll get to kind of Travis Hunter more later in the episode, but we kind of talked about it ad nauseum. I really think that the NFL as a whole is really undervaluing these 3 wide receivers, and Parker Washington, Jakobi Meyers, and Brian Thomas Jr. Parker Washington, I truly think, is going to be this team's number 1 wide receiver just based on the momentum that he had at the end of last year and the potential and the kind of just overall trajectory that he's going to continue to have. Jakobi Meyers, he's going to be your steady Eddie, reliable target that Trevor Lawrence in this offense can go to on really key third downs and other kind of pivotal situations. And then Brian Thomas Jr., he's got the biggest potential. He's been crushing it so far in camp. We'll see overall if he can reach those heights. And we're going to dive into more of why I think the Jaguars are in a great position when it comes to their skill position. But we could not do today's episode if it wasn't for our friends over at PrizePicks. Today's show is sponsored by PrizePicks, America's #1 sports picks app. The big soccer tournament is here. Baseball is well underway, and along with a ton of other sports that you can cash in with our friends over at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 sports picks app and is the best place to win cash while watching sports. You can choose from numerous stat projections on PrizePicks, including passing yards, rushing yards, touchdowns, points, rebounds, assists, hits, home runs, and a whole lot more on PrizePicks, and it is available in most states, including California, Texas, and Florida. Speaking of daily fantasy lineups, I've had one for the soccer tournament that was going on today, and I'm going to tell you right now, I didn't hit, but I'm not afraid to show my losses on PrizePicks. I had more on Erling Haaland goal. He didn't actually play for Norway in the soccer tournament. Kylian Mbappe, he was red hot going into this one. He did not even get a goal, as his teammate Dembele actually had a hat trick in the first half, which is crazy enough. I'm not even sure if Sarr hit his shots target, but I'll be back with PrizePicks because I want to go with the best daily fantasy app that I can possibly use, and that, of course, in my opinion, is PrizePicks. New user offer. Download the PrizePicks app today with the link in the comments and the description, and use code HMA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code HMA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. So getting back into this kind of wide receiver discussion, when you factor in Travis Hunter, who I think he's going to have an increased role at the cornerback spot, so I'm not necessarily sure what percentage of the wide receiver kind of just overall pie he will get. The main focus is on these three wide receivers. But that being said, you do have depth behind him. I think Josh Cameron had a really good camp for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and we'll see kind of who all makes the roster. But that top four, and again, Bill Barnwell is taking it based on what he kind of saw last year. I think that he was looking at it more half glass empty than half glass full. Based on where they played this last season, I think this Jaguars group, especially the receivers, is being undervalued by people outside of Jacksonville. Parker Washington, I think, is going to be a 1,000-yard receiver this upcoming year. I think that he is on that trajectory, and as a former sixth-round pick, he's not necessarily getting the hype that I think he deserves. Jakobi Meyers has been Mr. Undervalued, Mr. Underrated, willing to do whatever as either a blocker or as a pass catcher. And if Brian Thomas Jr., who I think is going to have a bounce-back year in his second offseason with Liam Cohen in this offense, to me, this wide receiver groups can not only turn into what Bill Barnwell ranks as a bottom half group, into close to damn near, I say, top 10 group in the National Football League. But that's just my opinion. I want to hear from you guys. Where do you think the Jaguars wide receiver room ranks in the NFL? To me, if you want to rank them outside the top 10, that's fair, but not even top half the league. To me, that's ESPN sleeping on your Jacksonville Jaguars. More from Bill Barnwell here. It seems at least a tad optimistic to count on all those versions showing up, though. Thomas inspired concerns about his desire to catch balls in tight spaces and never seemed to get it right in 2025 as he battled injuries. And look, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say and point out BTJ did not have a great year last year. And there were concerns about, him going over the middle. Was he fully invested? Was he, completely bought into what the Jaguars offense was turning into under Liam Cohen? Well, he attacked this offseason, and Liam Cohen has taken notice of it. From the moment the Jaguars wide receiver season ended, and Liam Cohen and James Gladstone took their end-of-season press conference, they, from day one, have supported Brian Thomas Jr., saying that he's going to be a big piece of the puzzle and that they believe in him. Well, so far, at least through OTAs and minicamp, Liam Cohen's had a couple things to say on BTJ. One notable thing with this being, we've been pleased on his approach this offseason in terms of just how he's carried himself, the way he's attacked things, the way that he has tried to embrace this role in this Jaguars offense. And speaking of that Jaguars offense, Liam Cohen is going to really try to focus on increasing the downfield passing attack for Jacksonville, Trevor Lawrence, and the crew. He said this back in, I want to say this was early OTAs, getting the ball down the field a little bit more with throwing the ball, post goes and pushing the ball downfield a little bit more. He wants to create that explosive element in this offense. And who is better at doing that than a guy that ran 4.3 back in college and still has that explosive ability, in my opinion, Brian Thomas Jr. And we've seen the highs that he can carry. It's just overall finding that fit, finding that chemistry with Trevor Lawrence, which Trevor Lawrence has talked about, how much he has grown this offseason and really try to put in the effort to, get that relationship as a wide receiver and a quarterback to where it needs to be. I think the sky's the limit for Brian Thomas Jr. I personally think, Parker Washington will be this team's wide receiver one, but it wouldn't shock me if BTJ has a bounce back year in 2026. Let's get into the other receivers, shall we? Barnwell had this to say. Meyers has been a solid pro for years, but after he cooled off down the stretch, his rate stats were right in line with where they had been for most of his time with the Patriots and Raiders. I've been a Washington fan for a while, but this same organization signed Dyami Brown to play ahead of him last offseason. While that may be true, Parker Washington then showed why it was kind of opposite in terms of, why Parker Washington should have been valued more than Dyami Brown. And Dyami Brown's obviously not on this team anymore. I went back and looked. After Jakobi Meyers was traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars from the Las Vegas Raiders. Both these guys really put up solid numbers. And like they're not eye-popping numbers by any means, but relative pace, Jakobi Meyers, I thought, had a solid season. Again, considering the fact that he didn't go through a training camp, he didn't go through a preseason, he didn't go through an OTA period with Jacksonville. But I thought those were pretty solid numbers. 42 catches on 61 targets for almost 500 yards. And we know about how Parker Washington ended the season. Like, to me, I'm not at all, dissuade or any bit lacking confidence when it comes to Jakobi Meyers and Parker Washington. To me, their roles have kind of already been established. If anything, we might see a slight increase in Parker Washington's role based on Liam Cohen's comments. But Jakobi Meyers is going to do what he does. And if he's your third wide receiver, if you want to call him that, he's a really good wide receiver 3 in this Jacksonville offense. And I think that with another, kind of offseason program, learning kind of his role and not being just injected into it during the middle of the season is only going to bode well for Jacksonville moving forward. So, and Parker Washington, he's steadily increased over his first 3 seasons. And I think that Barnwell just kind of used that De'Ami Brown stats. Like, well, they signed De'Ami Brown. Well, it's like, yeah, De'Ami Brown didn't do anything. Parker Washington stood up and was this team's number 1 wide receiver the last month of the season. So I don't necessarily understand that kind of logic from Barnwell personally, but he's entitled to his opinion. Now to the player that I know you guys are all wanting to hear and talk about, and it's none other than the two-way former Colorado Buffalo and Travis Hunter. This is what Barnwell had to say. And Hunter, who was expected to be major in cornerback and minor at wide receiver this year, struggled to become a steady and reliable member of the passing attack in his first season, posting a 12-yard game the week before the big performance in England. And that England game was Travis Hunter's, coming out party, as it were, as a wide receiver. 14 targets, 8 receptions, 101 receiving yards with a touchdown, and 12.6 yards per catch. His snap count last year really showed that Liam Cohen and James Gladstone valued him as a wide receiver. I mean, you can go down the list that you see on screen. He was featured way more on offense, almost 2-to-1 compared to where he was on defense. Now, he is coming off that torn LCL injury, so I understand there being a little bit of, hey, what does he look like? What is he going to be in terms of this offense? How much at corner is he going to play versus wide receiver? Regardless of how I think, regardless of how anybody else thinks, I think Jacksonville, Gladstone, Liam Cohen, the entire crew, they want Travis Hunter to be involved in offense. That's only going to be better because while I do think his ceiling is higher at corner than it is at wide receiver, I still think he can be one of the better athletes on the offensive side of the ball for Jacksonville, and that only adds to this wide receiver room and the potential that it can exude on the offensive side of the ball. It's only going to be good for Trevor Lawrence and the crew. We'll get into the last part of what Barnwell had to say around this Jaguars offense, which he may or may not have some fair points, but I would not be able to do this episode of Jags Now without our wonderful friends over at SeatGeek. Use code CHAT10 to get 10% off your tickets with SeatGeek. Today's show is made possible by our friends over at SeatGeek. MLB is in full swing. The World Cup is here, and you can get tickets to all different types of sporting events on SeatGeek. The NFL schedule is officially released, and SeatGeek is the best place to go if you want to get go to a Jaguars game this year. Now, personally, I'll be in studio calling the Jaguars games from our studios here in Dallas, Texas. But if you want to go to a Jaguars game anywhere in the United States, or heck, even international, use our friends over at SeatGeek. The Jaguars take on both the Eagles and Texans overseas in London, but to kick off the Jacksonville season, Jaguars take on the Browns at home, and you can get tickets with SeatGeek for as low as $179. Whether it's a ball game, concert, or any other ticket, SeatGeek is the place to go as they have your back when purchasing tickets. Each ticket is rated on a scale of 1 to 10, so you know when you're getting a good deal. Look for the green dots as they mean good, red dots as they mean bad. Use code CHAT10 for 10% off your tickets at SeatGeek. That's 10% off of any tickets with promo code CHAT10. Make sure you click the link in the description to download the app and use the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later. Thank you, SeatGeek. Excuse me. All right, getting into the rest of what Bill Barnwell had to say here. I'm holding out hope of Thomas returning to form and the wideouts around him doing enough to impress, but running back is a clear weakness. Bhayshul Tuten showed little explosiveness as a rookie. Little explosiveness? I think that's kind of a stretch, averaging 3.7 yards per carry and fumbling twice on 93 touches. With Travis Etienne leaving, Tuten will be expected to assume a larger role. Chris Rodriguez Jr. is a useful runner, but he offers less as a receiver than any other regularly seen back in the NFL, and the former Commanders back is already battling a foot injury. And I'm not going to really push back too much here from what Bill Barnwell has to say because I do agree with him. The running back room has a lot to prove in 2026. With Travis Etienne walking out the door, your most experienced back in your running back trio from last season was ironically a guy that wasn't even on your team in 2025 in Chris Rodriguez. And while I do think he's going to serve a role in that short yardage game, around the goal line, etc., I do expect Bhayshul Tuten to kind of step forward as this team's kind of bell cow back, if you will. But I do think it's going to be closer to like a split with Rodriguez, probably around 60-40 if I had to guess. The running back room is largely based on projection. There's no doubt about it. I think that Tuten is going to be somebody that is going to be asked to have an increased workload and somebody that is going to shoulder a lot of the workload, but I think he's ready for it. And the fact that he said, hey, he didn't show any explosiveness last year. Did you not watch the game against the Buffalo Bills? He had multiple long runs in that game for Jacksonville that broke the game wide open, him and Travis Etienne for that matter. I'm confident with Liam Cohen's plan for this rushing attack. They clearly addressed the tight end room this offseason with having more of a blocking mindset in mind. Drafting Nate Borkinger, they added Emmanuel Pregnon, the offensive guard out of Oregon, in the day 2 of the NFL draft. I think even Tanner Koziel, with what he showed so far in training camp, might be a plus as a run blocker as well, too. So I think that they're only going to commit more to this rushing attack and make things easier for Bhayshul Tuten and Chris Rodriguez as well. But obviously, Barnwell is not really factoring that in when it comes to just the overall talent for this running back room in Jacksonville. What say you guys? I kind of went through what Ben Barnwell had to say, but I want to hear your guys' opinion. Do you think this ranking is fair, number 18th in terms of skill talent for the Jacksonville Jaguars? Type H if you think it's high for the Jaguars, which I'd be surprised if I get any H's down below. Type F if you think it's fair, or type L if you think it's low. Let me know down in the comments section. And that's going to conclude this episode of Jags Now, presented by Chat Sports. We'll be back with another episode here shortly, but if you never want to miss out on all things Jacksonville Jaguars, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and until next time, guys, peace out.